there'll be a lot of bloodshed, and in 100 years there's going to be democracy in Egypt. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't have 100 years to sit around and wait for that and say, you know what, we can't stop the forces, so let me sit back and let them bomb the hell out of me or whatever else. No, maybe that's true. It may be and it may not be. But that is not what I call the forces of freedom. In Egypt, the forces of freedom were not the ones spurring that Facebook revolution. That's the first mistake. They were not. There were a few of them. There's a small number of them. But many of those, as I also described the rape of Lara Logan in this book, they were the jeans and sneakers Facebook revolutionaries. Just because someone's on Facebook doesn't make him a liberal Democrat. It also means that they're saying, you know what, we've been abused by the Mubarak regime so long. Now we want to be the abusers.
Well, I think there were a lot of people in Egypt who didn't vote for the Muslim Brotherhood, right? The elections.
No, they voted for the Salafists.
Well, Shafiq was the second candidate and got almost half of the vote. I think it's more complicated than that. Anyway,
okay.
We'll go to the audience, and I want to. Because Nathan was not here to defend himself, he didn't say anything to me about the French Revolution in 100 years.
No, he didn't. But I've heard that's true. So we have to say that.
Okay, Caroline, you want to go? Ashley, how do you want to do this? Just people will stand up, or is there a microphone, or what?
Back that up. Can we go live?
So I just wanted to ask a question.
Just 1 second, Carolyn. In fact, Natan Tremansky was here earlier in the evening. He may still be floating around somewhere. But I do want to say hello to Caroline, because she's been on this program almost every year.
Okay, well, if you want me in the audience, just bring Ruthie here.
Okay.
Otherwise, she's on the stage.
Give us your question.
So, relating actually to the whole issue of democracy and to the issue of the Muslim world, one of the things that I've always found interesting about Americans and Israelis is that because we're free, we have a lot of time to think about our lives and how we want to live them, and therefore we're not that involved in the people around us. Did you find when you were interviewing these people that they developed perhaps after the fact a curiosity about Iran, or did you find that, and about the developments inside of the Islamic world after this had happened to the United States, or did you find that once the crisis was over and the hostages were freed that they went back to not caring? And if so, how do you, obviously my view is that yes, they stopped caring, and therefore we're seeing a repetition of this with Obama. So first of all, do you agree? And second of all, what do you think that we can do to try to get people to be more curious, even when they're free and have all of the time in the world to think about their own life and how much they hate their own cynical politicians and don't think about the societies that surround us in this world?
Wow, that's a tough one. The first question is easier than the second one to answer.
And by the way, great book.
You'll be able to buy the book tonight at the discount at that table over there. It's worth reading, and will fill in a lot of the missing pieces that are not being covered tonight.
Right, okay. Carolyn, what you asked me, if people sort of go back to their lives, what is interesting is that I think that's true, but I think it's even worse than that. It's more than that they go back to their lives and forget, but somehow it doesn't make a dent. Even that kind of major event didn't seem to make a dent in people who already believed in negotiation above all. So it wasn't merely that they sort of forgot, but rather they adhered to those policies and politics afterwards. But one of the hostages, named Barry Rosen, who was, he was always a Democrat, and always, he probably still is, and certainly no right-winger or anything like that. He was extremely traumatized by all of this. He actually was a Farsi speaker, by the way, a Jew and a Farsi speaker. And Barry Rosen went through a horrible trauma after this happened for years. But one of the things he's been doing since then is fighting one of the clauses that Jimmy Carter had to agree to as part of the deal to release the hostages. And one of those, and the clause had to do with that no American can sue the Iranian government anymore after that event. Had to agree to that. So the hostages feel like, okay, listen, that's not a real agreement. I mean, you have, even in legal terms, If someone puts a gun to your head and you sign an agreement, that doesn't constitute a legal agreement. This definitely was the gun to the head kind of agreement, you know, let them out and and there are a group of those hostages who are still fighting that specific issue rather than the general. He hasn't changed his general view. All he wants is for the hostage takers to give him an apology. He says they never apologized. Okay, so that's one thing. The other is that some people change their minds after things happen. I can use Israel as an example. We saw that there were people, not mentioning any names, David Horovitz, whose politics shifted after, let's say, the Second Intifada, the First Intifada. People, I don't mean the whole worldview, but let's put it this way, as my father likes to say, they switched the ground under me. Okay, I was a liberal, but now being a liberal means that, you know, and so now I'm called a right-winger. Okay, something like that. The point being that the same thing happened in America. How you get people to pay attention to things, you know what, I honestly don't know the answer to that question, Carolyn. I think you would do a better job of it than I would to understand that, because I think that the willful blindness about the fact that any Israeli who serves in the military and lives in our neighborhood, that any Israeli today doesn't see the dangers, immediate dangers, or somehow blames Israel for it. If that happens here, how in the world can Americans see it differently?
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, Bobby.
We have one more question.
Okay.
Please come up here so everybody hears the question.
First of all, thank you very much for a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Bobby.
But when you talk about wrapping your head around something, one thing just never ceases to amaze me. And that's how the left, and to a large extent the radical left, which has always stood for certain principles, has embraced Muslim theology, Muslim politics, and Muslim actions, even though they are the antithesis not only of left-wing beliefs, but of societal beliefs. And yet, there's complete silence. An Israeli soldier hitting a protester with a gun stock, immediately it's around the world. But shooting 200 people, including 60 kids in the head, well, that's okay. You know, and I just can't understand how in anyone's mind that can continue to be the norm in the world.
Well, Andy McCarthy wrote this great book, I recommend it to everybody, called The Grand Jihad, how the left and radical Islam, I can't remember the exact underline, if anyone can, why they oh, that's willful blindness, but the Grand Jihad also had, they're both, the Grand Jihad has that too. The collusion between the left and the radical Islam that doesn't make sense, and he explains how it does make sense.
We have another question here.
I have a question. It seems to me that there's always a bottom line, and the bottom line is, whom does it profit? When you say they disbanded the CIA, who disbanded and for what reasons? And when you think of it, Carter went on to be a consultant to Gaddafi, and it seems there was definitely a payoff. I mean, nobody can be that stupid. And I think that the business of America is business, and Saudi Arabia had an enormous influence on how the CIA and certain institutions, State Department especially, saw Islam and how they facilitated the Islamic victories in Bosnia and so on. And so, who pays them?
Well, you know, the question here has to do with money, and I'm really bad at that stuff. I know, and you, I understand what you're saying, that there might be, you know, to follow the money trail, to understand. But I personally, you know, everyone has his own pet peeve. Mine is ideology. I actually think that people have ideology. It's not just, you know, who's funding them. There is a lot of that, maybe. There's a bit of that. I know the Carter Center, there was a question about funding there, and Alan Dershowitz made a whole big stink about that, but I haven't followed the money trail, just the ideology trail.
One more question here. We're trying to take care of everybody. Speaking to the mic.
Thank you, Ruthie. I'm a bit puzzled by your ideology because you seem to suggest that if you are not embracing an interventionist type of politics and you're choosing dialogue and you're choosing negotiation, it's as if you are colluding with the ideology of the opposition. And I've got a problem with that because I think that you can engage in dialogue, you can engage in negotiation without necessarily saying that I actually believe in your ideology or I believe your ideology is right. So why is it that you're equating negotiation with, oh, we are weak, we are not really proud of what we are standing for, we're not proud for, you know, the values that we represent, and it means that we are actually colluding with the enemy, over the ideology of the enemy?
Okay, that's a good question. And I think the answer is that there's nothing wrong with negotiating. If two parties have the aim to settle a dispute, all right? That could be a husband and wife, it could be neighbors, it could be anybody. There is a dispute and two people have an argument and they then want to come to an arrangement. When you have a radical force, could be a government, could be a terrorist group, who has no interest in reaching an end goal with you, you are not negotiating. What he is saying is, I want to destroy you, nothing you do will be good enough, you are bad and we are going to wipe you out. There is no room for negotiation. And what you said, I'm for interventionist. I would say it the other way around. I think we're too interventionist with handing out the cash to people who don't deserve it. All right, we meaning the West, by the way. When I say we, I mean Israel, the United States, and the European Union. You know, it's one thing not to dictate to another country what it does internally. It is quite another to reward it for doing things that are antithetical.
Executive Director of the Zionist Organization of America, and a good friend.
Hi, Ruthie.
No speeches, just
No
a question.
speeches. Quick question. By the way, I'm going to move your book up to #1 on the must-read triage list. I just wanted to ask you, you know, there are many policy wonks and pundits out there that believe that Jimmy Carter is much, much more consequential as a post-president than he was during a failed presidency. Do you discuss that at all in your book, of what impact he's having now, either through his books, let's say like Peace Not Apartheid? And number two, do you foresee that maybe in 2030, 2040, we will be dealing with the same thing from former President Obama after a failed presidency?
I don't go into detail about Jimmy Carter's post-presidency. It's mentioned, of course. But what I do say and what I mean is that what is consequential about his post-presidency is not that it's particularly consequential. I mean, it's all right. There are post-presidents. You know, presidents have a life after their presidency. But that his legacy has really taken hold in the Democratic Party. That was the Democratic Party, let's say, of Scoop Jackson. And then it moved over to become the Democratic Party of radicals like Jimmy Carter. And his legacy lives on. It doesn't really matter. Look, Jimmy Carter may even do good things. He goes and builds houses in the third world and whatever, and that's, whatever he does is fine. But the fact that he's even speaking at the convention, you know, the point is that his legacy is alive and well in the party. That's one thing. And the other is that in other words, when you have a former president whose view of America is dim, and that affects his the party from which he hails, yes, it has an effect.
We have a policy here of always sticking to our schedule when we start, when we finish.
Okay.
Ruthie will be here for a while. You'll be able to talk to her, ask her your
And
questions.
there's more food.
You can buy the book. You're invited to partake of refreshments. We appreciate your coming. We look forward to having you here at the next meeting. David and Ruthie, you were great. And there'll be a minute for Mara to get started too. Thank you very much. Happy birthday. Ah.